Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Simonian with the Neocon team, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for our April programming series on designing well, and today's session with George, Candace, and Nancy. Just a couple of items before we get started. Today's session has been approved for accreditation, and certificates will be emailed to everybody who stays on for the full session within the next 3 business days. More details on accreditation are on our Neocon website under programming. Also, the final 15 minutes of the session will be Q&A. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat box. Okay, so let's get started with a little background on our presenters today. George Athens is principal and workplace studio leader at SmithGroup in Detroit. His career has blended architecture, building services, engineering, and information technology, and he specializes in exploring how rapidly advancing technologies are reshaping how we think about built environments and how we design them. Among George's passions is the transformation of workplace design based on data-supported human wellness to create high-performance environments. A principal at SmithGroup in Chicago, Nancy Cohout has more than 20 years of experience in the building design industry, including comprehensive mechanical design and project management for mixed use, workplace, higher education, science and technology, healthcare, and municipal clients. As an engineering leader in an integrated design firm, Nancy believes she has a responsibility to design a built environment that minimizes impact to our climate. This inspires her to push boundaries and strive for innovation. And Candace Messing is the program manager for the General Motors Global Technical Center Transformation Program. With 19 years experience at General Motors on the Sustainable Workplaces team, Candace has a broad background in building operations, construction, and space design. In her role, Candace leads a $1.4 billion investment to transform the Technical Center campus by utilizing open workspace concepts to provide an environment that encourages engagement and innovation and helps employees stop transacting and start real-time problem solving. Since the program's start in 2015, she has worked to transform 1.7 million square feet of space, utilizing holistic workplace design as a catalyst to enable a positive cultural change within the company. And now I'm going to pass the screen over to Nancy.
How's that going? Can you guys see it?
Yes, it worked. Thank you, Nancy.
All right. Candace, you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to say hello, and I'm excited to be able to talk to this whole group today. Again, Candace Messing, Program Manager at General Motors.
Hello, everyone. George Athens with SmithGroup. Really excited to present to you all today, and I'm interested to hear what questions might come up and what kind of conversation we might be able to spark.
I'm Nancy. I'm very excited to talk about these well building principles and how we implemented some of this at GM.
So we're going to start out today by a review of some of the thinking that underpins the decisions we make about creating work environments and how we apply science and what we'll talk about is a new set of metrics to unlock the potential in our people. And then after that, we'll move on to a review of the General Motors transformation work that's been going on at the Warren campus just outside of Detroit in Southeast Michigan. And then if the timing goes as planned, we'll have 10 or 15 minutes or 15 minutes for questions and answers following the presentation. So I guess with that, we'll get started. We'll start out by that review of the evolution of science and workplace. So we are in what many people have come to refer to as the fourth industrial revolution. Each of the previous three, dating back to the mid-18th century, has resulted in a transformation of the definition of work and the environments that supported that kind of work. The first two, I'll refer to them as the industrial age and the machine age. Drew a large portion of our population off the farm, where their brawn and brains was put to use in building machines and keeping those machines running. And then in the machine age, assembling things on an assembly line. And in the third industrial revolution, there was a completely new definition of work. I'm hearing an echo. So a complete different definition of work, and less relying on the brawn of the people who were working and much more on the brain power that people brought to their daily work. A lot of that work was rote in nature. It was repetitive and at times tedious, but with the rise of robotics and artificial intelligence, we're seeing that rote work being taken over by machines, by computers, robots, vast networks of computing power. And the nice thing about that is it really relieves, if we think positively about that, it relieves people of that tedious rote work and allows them the more creative problem solving that I think we'll really need in the future. In the next future of work, and to tackle the most challenging problems that we face, we'll need to have people fully engaged, and more so than we ever have in the past. And we'll need to win their hearts and collective minds. And I use that word collective intentionally. Science shows that diverse groups of happy, healthy people outperform their peers and get to solutions of thorny problems faster. So this slide here is an important underpinning of the thinking here. Many of you have seen this before in some form or another. This illustrates the results of a study done by the U.S. Department of Labor that points out for the average U.S. corporation, just over 90% of their costs are in some way associated with their people, and 10%, only, and just under 10% in the real estate, we put those people in. What's been reinforced over the last year, I think we've all seen this over the last year as we've worked our way through the pandemic, is it really is all about the people, and that's been really clear to us. And if we want to win the hearts and minds of talent, we'll want to focus on how we put that 10% to work for that 90%. Just a few percentage points increase in productivity can return meaningfully and significantly for the organization and the people in that organization, and also go a long way towards covering the real estate costs that the average corporation, or the average real estate costs that a corporation would incur. So how do we do this? Well, in order to do this, we need a shift in our mindset, and we need a new set of metrics to support that, and to support our evaluation of the environments and the buildings that we create. You see here two sets of metrics. On the lower part of the screen, you'll see the metrics I refer to as the metrics of efficiency, and I think of these as being born out of the first two industrial revolutions. They're really focused on conserving capital and capital's counterparts: efficiency, standardization, economies of scale, all in the interest of containing capital. But for success in the next future, we'll need a new set of metrics, and those on the top of the screen here. A lot has been written about things like recruiting, engagement, creativity, productivity, retention. And I think rather than just ideas and thoughts here, we need to figure out how to translate these and convert these into actual metrics. We'll always need to concern ourselves with those at the bottom. Conserving capital and natural resources will always be important, but it's the metrics at the top that will ultimately lead organizations to success. And it's those metrics that are directly focused, or that will allow us to focus directly on people. So we're really in a golden age of science and research that unlocks the key to explaining the impact of the environments that we create and the buildings that we put those on people. And if we follow it, it can be a roadmap that leads us to better results for people, and how we put that 10% into service for that 90%. Picking out a few of these, employee absences can be attributed to architecture with no connection to nature. We see an increase in performance, and specifically cognitive performance associated with higher ventilation rates. That's ventilation rates higher than the code would require. And then a reduction also in risk of having a stroke when people climb 3 to 5 floors a day. We live very sedentary lifestyles and work environments, and in our work environments, and we need to think about how we can foster movement and induce movement and by the environments we create. We can see from these numbers here, and this is just a small sampling of the vast amount of research available to us, that environments and buildings really do have a real and measurable impact on the people in them. This science also tells us that our connection to nature is critically important to our well-being. And I like to say, and Nancy and Candace might laugh to hear me say this again, but man evolved roaming the savannas of Africa, not sitting on the 34th floor of a high-rise in Manhattan. And the acknowledgement of that fundamental fact really should inform how we think about and how we create space for our people.
Okay, so on this slide, we have a few statistics and some imagery to show how we support those design concepts architecturally. The first one talks about fewer negative health symptoms in green certified buildings, and studies have shown there's real value to investing in healthy buildings. The middle slide talks about natural light and how it improves productivity. Now, this makes me laugh because in my last job, I had no natural light near me. And I didn't know, I didn't really notice, but I remember when I came to my current job, just feeling different at work with just light, natural light coming in from the windows. The last slide is an open stair, and basically we're spending 90% of our time indoors and mostly sedentary. So what architectural elements can we add to nudge people towards movement? So this is just an open stair, and we'll talk a little bit about how we added some features like that at GM. Certainly the global pandemic has made us all understand the value and the significance of fresh air and increased fresh air in terms of the spread of airborne pathogens. But there's also, and I think George mentioned it earlier, an increase in cognitive performance with more fresh air, and studies are showing that. In addition, comfort is important to performance of employees and well-being of employees. And I think it's kind of funny that on the psychrometric chart, the comfort range of women in temperature and humidity and the comfort range of men don't even overlap. So basically it tells you that there is no way to make everybody happy. We all knew that already. But having an office layout that allows people choice in where they sit, and or also just the ability to adjust the temperature is really important. One other thing, like I'll say, I don't think we do see a lot of office spaces with humidification, but I think in the next future of work, that will be more of a consideration. And I know a lot of people on this call might have be dealing with various materials, furniture, and certainly wood comes to mind as a material that has certain humidity ranges for optimal humidity ranges. And in addition, people are more comfortable. And on top of that, humidified space reduces the spread of airborne pathogens as well. So we just talked about the value of ventilation, and obviously there's no place that we have more fresh air than the outside. And I think during this pandemic, I know we've all been trying to find ways to meet up outside, right? But in addition to that, views to nature, workplace choice, we're all pretty portable these days. We've seen since we've all been working from home. So the opportunity to be able to go outside during your workday, the investment, sometimes a fairly minimal investment of Wi-Fi, some power outlets, some furniture, to have some outdoor space for people to work has great value. And then just to kind of underscore that all of these are supported by science. These we have healthy building certification programs, and they all kind of deal with different elements of healthy buildings. If you look on this graph, from the left to the right, the gray arch basically goes from conservation of natural resources to optimization for human resources. So just a quick high-level overview. LEED focuses on energy, and the Living Building Challenge focuses on energy and also equity. The WELL building standard focuses on physical and mental health of occupants, and Fitwel is focused on the physical fitness of occupants. But more importantly, just that science backs the design of healthy buildings. And I think George is kind of going to go into how there's a financial benefit to it too.
Yeah, I thank you, Nancy. I mean, I think many of these ideas can feel like abstract ideas and abstract thinking, and I really next want to just spend a couple of slides talking about how we make these ideas more concrete and how we translate them into math that we can use to inform the decisions we make. So here I've got just an idea mapped out in the form of a chart here. When we consider the return on investment of in building systems or design considerations that are intended to improve performance, we typically only think of, very often or too often, only think about the energy savings that will result. And that arrow there kind of points to where the analysis usually stops. And you can see if in that dark orange block, if that's the added cost, it would take us a number of years to get return on our investment. And it's often just unpalatable to companies to invest in higher performance because the energy savings, because the energy savings is not enough to get that payback fast enough. But if we actually connect the science and the metrics we just looked at, we can calculate the benefit of other things, including lower recruiting costs or higher success rates at recruiting, improved retention, better health, and higher productivity, ultimately higher output. And thereby, we much more quickly overcome that additional expense that we would incur when we're thinking about performance. And in this case, what we're arguing is thinking about performance in terms of how we improve people performance, not just building performance, which of course is also very important. So getting back to that idea of abstract thinking, we understand these things intuitively and kind of in qualitative terms. It makes sense to us that, and we feel better, as Nancy said, when we're in daylit spaces and we have better access to fresh air and better access to daylight. But design decisions ultimately face the scrutiny of those in charge of the financial performance and the management of the project. Ultimately, and we come up against the metrics of efficiency. People are going to look at those metrics of efficiency and ask us why the cost per square foot is higher than we would typically see. So how do we actually quantify this science? How do we use this science to strike that balance between the metrics of efficiency and that people set of metrics that I spoke about earlier? What you see here is two equations, one representing the impact of improved glazing, both the cost of improving the glazing for a building as well as the improvement, and the same idea for improved ventilation. On the left, you see the cost incurred for both of those, for each of those, and then to the right of that, you see the improvement, the predicted improvement in productivity for each of those moves. This is the number that comes from that science that we're talking about there. And you can see that each of them results in a significant improvement and improvement in productivity and ultimately a savings in salary. Add to that the improvement in productivity that we just take a look at that productivity savings. It's a significant savings to the company and a justification for the additional, the added expense or the added expenditure. So I just want to close out this section by citing a quote from Anthony Ravitz. Anthony is the real estate and workplace services leader at Google. He's also in charge of sustainable design and green building and sustainable design at Google. Anthony says that productivity is not just about how quickly you can perform a task or even how well you do it. It's about how you feel while you're doing it and how much energy you have to play with your kid at the end of the day. That definition of productivity and that attitude toward people is very different than anything we would have seen in the previous 3 industrial ages, yet I think it captures really nicely how we need to begin to think about our people and to win their hearts and minds. And we need to, I would suggest to you that we need to take a sincere interest in their personal circumstances, connect them to a real sense of purpose and meaningful work, and through the environments and the buildings that we put them in, that we create for them, send the message that you are important to us, we value you and your contribution. So with that, that concludes the first section, and we're now going to turn our attention to the GM transformation, and Candace is going to walk us through that. And I think you'll see many connections between what we just talked about, that science and those metrics, and the work that we've been doing along with General Motors at the Warren campus. So Candace, you want to take it from here?
Perfect. Thank you, George. Okay, so we're going to do a quick, jump back in history real quick to move forward. So I understand the irony of talking about the future of work, and we're going back in time, but I hope you find that all meaningful. So just wanted to start off with the history of our campus, right? So as we talked about, I have the charge for doing the large-scale renovation at the General Motors Technical Center. And so I just wanted to give us this background. So the General Motors Tech Center was actually opened in 1956. Its inauguration ceremony opened with Dwight Eisenhower. And so you can see the pictures in these drawings of this campus. Very historic from a modern perspective in terms of this is a Saarinen design originally commissioned to Eliel Saarinen and then picked up by Eero Saarinen shortly after Eliel grew sick, and then he actually took over the design and completed the campus. And so it's important to note, actually, SmithGroup was part of this from the very beginning as well as the architect of record. So our 1 square mile campus that came to be in 1956, SmithGroup has had a hand in from that very beginning. So next slide, please. So this campus, what it was. So really a modernist gem, right? So if anyone knows anything about the vintage of the campus and some of the contributors, Saarinen is certainly a large name, but if you see in the bottom left-hand side, Bertoya screen, top right-hand corner, the Kevin Roche's stairs, the Calder fountain, there's a huge breadth of contributors that were brought in to create really this kind of Versailles of industry that I'm lucky enough to get to work on most days. And so a lot of real thought and intention and a real shift in terms of the way that campuses were being built at that time, with a real turn towards the idea that it wasn't about opulence, it really was about functionality, and it really was about people. So I love the idea that, that original Saarinen design and intent continues to breathe life today. So on to the next slide. This is just continuing some of those great pieces and showing you kind of some images of the campus much long ago. And so again, the Calder fountain in the bottom left, the Pevsner statue. So a lot of great works of art and a lot of really significant contributions come out of this campus. Even from a design perspective, there's a lot of unique building methods that were conceived of on this campus. So if you think about curtain wall systems with neoprene seals, or the 5-foot modular system around walls, corridors, and offices, those things were kind of conceived of on this campus and continue to be employed to this day as kind of standards and building methods. Go ahead. So what it became, that's what it was, and so in 2014, it became a National Historic Landmark. So I had worked on this campus for a large portion of my career, and it wasn't until we undertook this partnership with the state of Michigan to make the west side of our campus, a National Historic Landmark, that I truly fell in love with what this campus was, and became even more committed to the idea of restoring it, or taking it to that next kind of level of its future. So go on to the next slide, Nancy. Did we lose Nancy? Oh, no, okay. So what it became, and we can just build this one through. So 60 years later, right? Again, we have a 1 square mile campus, 710 acres, 38 buildings. Thanks to Thomas Church, the landscape architect, a host of trees and shrubs. 38.3 acres of lakes and ponds. So again, someone that really understood the idea of wellness in nature and integrating elements into the human design of space. But you can see there was a lot on this campus that, from an operational perspective, to maintain. And so, unfortunately, as it's wonderful to have the ability to be a historic gem, but with being a historic gem comes age. And so the flip side of that coin, unfortunately, kind of brought us to a place where we have a lot of aged buildings, in certain buildings, 25 plus years of deferred maintenance. And that's really just because, as a company that's geared towards, making vehicles and doing those types of things at the time, we were always trying to make sure that our profits and things were put back into what we were developing and the things that best affect the end user. So there was certainly some challenges, just maintaining a campus of this size and this age. And then we had a Southeast Michigan consolidation program that basically took all of this around, a lot of the surrounding buildings or smaller areas that people were located in throughout Southeast Michigan. And there was a fairly centralized attempt to bring a lot of those people to the Tech Center campus. It was being underutilized, and we had a lot of space and we owned it. So there was a lot, and there was great value in trying to make sure that all of global product development kind of was happening in one place. So everybody was brought in. Unfortunately, during the time that was done, there wasn't a lot of financial ability or time to essentially make sure that all of those people were laid out in the appropriate adjacency. It was more, there's room in a building, we can fit this team here, move on. And then the campus population at that time was growing as well. So these were some things that we had to certainly deal with and continue to try to tackle each day. So you combine that with the changing industry, right? So General Motors, I believe the General Motors I hired into and the General Motors I work for today has certainly evolved over time. And I'm truly, truly passionate and excited to be working for a company that has this worldview, right? The idea that we're committed to a future of zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. We're committed to our electrification future and some very vast goals around sustainability. And so Mary Barra, our CEO, actually said back about 6 years ago, actually now, she was quoted in a lot of publications as saying the automotive industry will change more in the next 5, she really said sometimes 5 to 10 years than it has in the last 50. And boy, was she right? So the amount of change that I've seen just in these last 5 years certainly surpasses anything that I've seen in my career prior to that. So I get asked this question a lot. I think you heard some of the stats at the beginning and a little bit of what we'll continue to go over, but people want to understand, and going back to that construct that George was talking about, right? Where in a world where you have to, justify every business case, and justify investment, and in a place where, we've even had struggles on that our own, how did we make the stars align so we were able to make this level of investment into the campus and most importantly into its people? So essentially, what we were looking at is an aged campus as we reviewed. We really, as a company, understood that we needed to be able to attract and retain talent. So we were starting to kind of evolve along some of those things that George was talking about earlier as well. We understood that we had this changing industry and very lofty goals, and we needed to essentially retool ourselves to be able to achieve them. And then this increased population and those fractured adjacencies. So how do you repair all of those issues? And the idea was that we were going to renovate a campus. And I came into this job in 2015 to renovate a campus. And I was really excited to be able to do that. And then along came Dane. So I talk about the one big idea. And so Dane Parker is our Chief Sustainability Officer and also our Vice President of Sustainable Workplaces. He's actually in the process of retiring to go on to the next chapter. But Dane came to us shortly after we got funded and had this idea around really creating an agile work environment and really creating a space that absolutely brought the best results for people. And so you combine that renovation with the Dane factor, as I call it, and you end up with the General Motors Global Technical Center transformation. Okay, so just a little recap of what's going on, and I know you heard some in the intro. So started in 2015. This was some of the original concepts of things that we plan to touch and do on campus. Again, trying to heal the campus in a holistic fashion. So looking at things, everything from transportation, to the buildings themselves, people, how everything comes together. Right at this moment, we're about 3.5 million square feet of agile work environment that's either currently built or under construction. So we've got a lot of design and construction happening on the campus as we speak. And that $1 billion investment continues to grow as we really strive to create places that people want to be. So as I learned very quickly in this game, that space is really only one piece of this puzzle, right? So all the investment, generally when you hear people talk about this, as I spend a ton of time talking about culture with people and the transitions that we're doing, the conversation tends to focus itself back on space. And so I think this is something that we learned very early on that's very important, and I think we inherently knew, was the idea that culture and results are really what we're trying to achieve with these spaces. And on our best day, the workspace is a catalyst, right? And so the idea of really focusing on the people, the leadership, the technology, the work processes, and then pairing the workspace into that really helps yield those culture and results. A lot of those things that George was talking about that we're trying to enable in their best way inside of the space. So transformation really isn't about space, furniture, efficiency, or even choice. It really truly is about culture, record-setting performance, collaboration, energy, innovation, transparency, accessibility, real-time problem solving, and interestingly enough in this conversation, all of those things tie into the idea of well-being. So really what we're trying to do continues to be to create optimal spaces for people to be able to do their best work. So on to the next. So we've had 5 key design strategies that we've employed since the beginning. The idea of openness, collaboration, flexibility and choice, identity, and well-being have been underpinning to the idea of these agile work environments that we were creating. On the bottom of the screen, you can see just a floor plate of one of the environments with the idea of choice being central to the design strategy. So meaning that you have 7 unique space types and the ability to flow between them based on who you are, how you feel, and the type of work you're doing at the moment. So a lot of intentional movement and things from wellness perspective are just actually built into the actual architecture of the space. Next. So I really like when we're talking about well-being to kind of dial back to the ideas of Rath and Harder around that there's essentially 5 elements to well-being. And I think in this last year, for me at least anyway, these have hit home more than ever, right? I think the last year in dealing with COVID-19 and the pandemic, I think we've started all collectively started to realize even more so that these elements have to be in harmony in order for things to be, for us to be really achieving our best. And so career well-being, the idea that you like doing what you do each day, which seems pretty important, and that you're motivated to achieve your goals. The idea of social well-being, having supportive relationships and having love in your life is critically important. Financial well-being, the idea of financial stress being one less thing to worry about and having a level of security from that standpoint. Physical well-being, so having enough good, healthy, and enough energy to get things done. Ties right back to the quote that George was talking about earlier. How much energy we have to take home at the end of the day too, or into the next room sometimes, the way we're working these days. And then community well-being, right? Like liking how you feel inside your community and being able to contribute to your community and having a tie into that community. So well-being really affects a lot of things, and similar to some of George's slides, it really can be quantified into tying back to, the number of sick days people take, their job performance, many things. So when all 5 of these elements are in alignment, really it can yield pretty amazing results. So from a space perspective, these are things we certainly are trying to employ, and from a company perspective. So 36% of people are more likely to report a full recovery after an illness if all of these are in harmony. Twice as more likely to say they adapt well to change. Change is hard for all of us, as I've learned. Kind of being at the front of an agile environment. 41% missed, or 41% less work missed as a result of poor health, and 81% less likely to seek out a new employer in the next year. So these are really, I think, really impactful things. And I work for General Motors, so I work with a lot of engineers. And I love the idea that we can tie these things back to data, real data, and help quantify the idea that it's not just about like, oh, we made some pretty space and everyone's going to feel good, right? There's really actually quantifiable things that we can tie back that really help us remember why what we're doing is so important. So next. Okay, so what we actually did, right? So here's the space. And so you can, I call this picture the divide often. It got published in a newspaper, and it very quickly, it's the first space we did on the entire campus, and it very quickly shows you kind of the difference between the old and the new. And so you can very quickly get a sense of, on the left side of the screen, in the transformed environment, the idea that natural light, views to nature, ability to choose, more movement, all sorts of things are being employed in that space that really change the way you feel about the environment. And kind of gone are the days of the idea of ownership in environments too. At one point, GM was a very hierarchical company, and so kind of breaking down very physically those walls and those dividers and those things that kept us separated, and taking away the idea that the amenities in the building were for the select few if you achieved enough in your career, and really getting to the idea that everyone should be able to partake in them. So no more corner offices by the window. Everyone has access to natural light, right? So and those leaders are out of their offices and more accessible, right? So that absolutely changes the way that people feel about the space. Just more photos of what was before, and then you can go to the next slide. And then this idea of after, right? So a couple other things to mention in these environments. Lighting was very critical to us. We have kind of, in the design world, people that we've talked about the light seekers and the dark seekers. So if you're doing really intensive math-based engineering, you might not want to, be in a very bright environment. So we have solar harvesting shades. We have all sorts of things that can help create a more tailored fit into an environment. A lot of look at uplighting and things that reduce glare on screens. A lot of things that help us make sure that people are comfortable and that the space is adaptable. With the way that the power is distributed at those desks, you have the ability to turn desks, you have all power and data brought up to surface height, increased Wi-Fi in the spaces, all sorts of things that we consider barriers to collaboration, and we try to break those down with every movement that we make from a design standpoint. And then if you look on the right-hand side, that was just showing opportunity of choice, right? So that's an ideate space and places where people can come together to work around an idea. Okay, just more before, I think you're getting it. Sea of cubicles. Hi world cubicles. And then after in the environment, so again, just kind of showing how different environments can be employed. The idea of, you'll see a rack in that space, the idea of parts storage. So every unique business unit in General Motors has its own identity, its own process and function. And so in order for people to feel best in their space, their identity has to be represented, and also they have to have all of the things that they need to do their best work. And so that's just an idea. We have parts, obviously, as a car company, as an automotive company. And so parts are really important to be able to be stored and viewed and used inside the environment rather than the idea of just put away behind in a closet to gather dust. So next. So wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of break areas. So this was, I'm sure, really of the times at some point, right? This is the break area inside of one of our largest buildings on campus at Cole, a building that holds 13,000 people. And the idea of break areas completely changed as we now build what we call town commons. And so if you think about the way of the past, which was that photo, areas are transformed into spaces that really aren't purpose-built around the idea of eating. The intention very much is that they are spaces where people can go and use throughout the day. And so much more evolved to the eat, meet, greet philosophy. And these certainly have a nod towards wellness from a few different elements, but also should note that we increased the amount of refrigerator storage and freezer storage to encourage people to be able to bring in healthy things. And then also the number of microwaves in the environment. And then even the, we have a large breakout of all the different items that can be recycled. And whenever you would find a general waste option, you'll find a recycle option too. Because I always say we don't want to tempt people to make a bad choice. So we make sure that people absolutely have the best choices together at all times. So we're committed to that sustainable future. Next slide. So this is a building Estes this is just kind of unique to me that here's an escalator that was in the building. So if you think back to the 1956 openings, right, this was something that was very much future. Like this is something we're going to give people and it's going to help them move through the space. But if you think about it in today's terms, it's very closed off. And honestly, it was broken down. All of our escalators they belong in a museum someplace at this point. So getting parts and those types of things was always difficult. So next slide will show you kind of our next take at how we really want people, traversing through the space. So it's really important to us from an architectural perspective to create elements that cue you to create movement through the space, that draw you through an environment, obviously important from a well-being perspective. And then on this slide, this also shows how we took out those escalators, put in the open stairs, and then brought in the natural elements with skylights, the elements of nature with the wood and plants, and then really created that opportunity for movement and completely honestly transformed the way people feel about moving through the space. Prior to this, all communicating between the stairs, or all stairways were tucked away behind closed doors. So you didn't really have, it didn't even feel like you had an option really to move between the space, and now the space naturally draws you through it. Okay. And so one of our last examples, just kind of talking about the space. So this is at Cole, the building that had 13,000 people in it. One thing we've absolutely started to recognize is how important it is to make sure that people have abilities to have mental jogs. So the idea that you're not just focused on work, some of our best creative breakthroughs are done when we're naturally, mildly content and not thinking about anything. There's usually some degree of noise element in that space. And so we absolutely are creating spaces that people have, whether it's a foosball table or a shuffleboard table or a ping pong table, elements in our interior environments where people can step away and really do something that's actually going to help improve their work level. And so we started to draw those elements outdoors. If you go on to the next slide, this was a space that was exterior with a courtyard. It looked like a place I never wanted to get trapped. And so now we've kind of moved that, and this is under construction as we speak. So there's kind of a render to show you, but we're really trying to draw the idea that during those few months of the year when we actually have good weather, allowing people to be able to come outside, take a respite, do work from outside. Frankly, we have areas that have the Wi-Fi enabled, and we're adding 1,200 plants to this space very shortly. So just creating elements that are immersive in nature where you can continue to get your best work done. And then just a connector. So I laugh, we're in Michigan, right? So this campus is in Michigan, and it snowed 3 inches today in April. So just a reminder that while we want to increase movement on a campus and we have all those sidewalks and great things we talked about, sometimes we need connectors to help encourage that movement and make sure people are using those types of things year round. So this is just an idea of a connector that brings you through the space that bridges a parking deck to the building. And then just more slides that kind of show you choice and variety in the space and give you opportunity to pick what environment works best for you at the moment. And then really quickly, just to talk about, because I know we're getting short on time, to talk about the idea that leadership. So General Motors leadership understood from the very beginning, if we were moving to this agile work environment, it absolutely was not going to work if we said, hey, everyone's in an open environment, but by the way, I'm going to go back to my office and close the door, right? So they were very supportive and forthcoming over the idea that we needed to lead by example. And so this is just showing our LTI space essentially, so senior executives. and several vice presidents that work in an open environment. And it was really important to us to break down the ideas of transparency and secrecy. So you can even see with that top right image, it's actually a conference room where we cut glass into the conference room that comes right out of our main lobby to the building. We brought everybody to the center of the building where people are. There's no walls around it. And everyone feels different culturally from the idea that leadership is so much more accessible and working in the same ways that the rest of the environment is working. Go ahead. So really quickly, just the idea, we talked a little bit about community well-being being important and our goals towards sustainability. So this is just showing you our commitment. We're approaching $1 million worth of in-kind donation in terms of being able to take the items that were in the previous spaces that we had, and then when we transform them, we either repurpose them somewhere else in General Motors, or we took this model where we partnered with a company called Green Standards out of Canada, and they helped make sure that everything that comes out of our spaces aren't just diverted from landfill, but actually reinserted in the life cycle at the highest place they can be. So we've gotten to contribute to 89 different nonprofits in Southeast Michigan, in helping. We really love the idea of being able to help transform communities while we're transforming ourselves and continue to contribute to that sustainable future. Next. And so that's just a representation of some of the organizations we've been able to contribute to and partner with. And then measuring success. So I always get asked, like people always ask, but how do you measure productivity? And I always say, well, you figure it out, you let us know. But it's still in that regard, we do measure success, right? And so those ideas of engagement, retention, recruiting, workplace safety, all of that, we really do want to make sure that we're understanding our spaces being better utilized. Are they being utilized appropriately? Certainly now that we're evolving, through the pandemic, and the idea of the future of work is continuing to change as a lot of people work from home and hybrid models are being employed. How can we make sure we're still doing the right things in this space? So this just highlights, we have IR sensors through all of our spaces with a tool called Enlighted that helps us measure and understand how space is functioning. And it helps us see very real time how some of these methods are being employed and working and make real time correction. Next slide. And so just as a result, right, all we're working towards generally is trying to change that culture, trying to create spaces that absolutely people want to be, that give them energy, that promote wellness and well-being. And so this is just some ideas and some photos of the team working together and some results. And that is it for our discussion. So we're moving on to questions.
Okay, so I'm looking. Let's see. This is for Candace. How do you see your campus changing as a result of the pandemic and the shift to a desire by most to work from home, at least part-time?
So absolutely changing, right? Yeah. So we actually are in the process. We have more people coming to the campus as kind of their home campus, but General Motors, I think, actually even just recently published a story this week, and we're continuing to talk about the idea of work appropriately. We have a dress code around the idea of just dress appropriately, and we very easily are trying to simplify the idea of work appropriately. So making sure that people have a campus and a space, and I think the Agile environment fortunately has queued us up to that degree of versatility that we're going to need going forward, where spaces are very adaptable and changeable and can be a variety of things. I think we very much see the campus becoming a place where people go to collaborate, very much the space where people go to get certain work done. We still honestly have roughly 2,000 people coming on the campus every day because of the amount of work and what has to happen on campus that people actually have to be there for. But that's with a population of roughly 23,000. So it's going to continue to evolve, but we do think that the workspace itself is queued up to make sure that those interactions, when people do need to be there, sometimes you need to just, I always joke, sometimes I need to be there just to be quiet too, right? Like I have a home with a dog and 3 children, or sometimes it's just for the Wi-Fi, right? But the idea is that people will go in for very intentional purposes, really around that idea of collaboration and use that environment, and that will continue to evolve.
Okay, and then this question is probably for George. Can you talk about a link to the research that shows the statistics from the golden age in human physiology research slide? If you don't have the answer to that right now and you want to add it to the chat, that's also.
Yeah, I don't have that at my fingertips, but you know, I mean, that research is, much of it is cited in the certification programs that you noted, Nancy, LEAD, WELL, Fitwel, Living Building Challenge. I forget if I'm not sure if that was all 4 of them, but you know, it comes from places like Harvard's research, Berkeley's research. Is from an assortment of different sources, and I don't think that those that we cited on that slide are all from one source. I can think about how we might be able to provide the sources that we cite in the presentation, how we might collectively pull that together and get that
Maybe
out.
that's a follow-up.
Neocon about that, yeah.
And then someone asked the question, Candace, in the before and after shot with the open office on the left and the high partition workspaces on the right, is that a current condition or is that a progress shot?
It was a progress shot. So that building itself is just finally, we're in the final stage. There were 6 stages in that building. So we're in the final stage of completing the entire building. So that exists no longer. And it was just a progress in time.
Okay, and then somebody's asking, most ventilation systems cannot be upgraded to provide 6 to 12 air changes per hour. I think we got an engineer on here, Candace. And those that do consume a tremendous amount of energy to exchange and manage the temperature and humidity of the additional volume of fresh air. Research shows that UV treatment of upper room air is by far the least expensive way to disinfect indoor air and more cost effective compared to mechanical ventilation. So shouldn't we be talking about purifying indoor air, at least in addition to adding more ventilation? Dave, I totally agree with you. I am an engineer. I was trying to tailor our presentation to our audience for Neocon, and I wasn't sure that I would have an audience that was interested in talking about the different types of filtration or air treatment like UV or bipolar or needle ionization, but definitely filtration and other sorts of treatment of air can help remove particulates and remove airborne pathogens, and certainly as a consideration. I think there's also some other options like recovering energy from air that's being exhausted from the building. But certainly I think, and also the credential programs consider that there's an energy penalty to increasing ventilation. So thank you for bringing that up. Let's see. Somebody asked a question, what percentage of seats are being assigned to one person?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And honestly, the answer is it varies, right? So certain groups are certainly more mobile, obviously, with the changes we just talked about, right? That's going to continue to evolve. But the old way, the way that we probably would have done this before Dane came along was we used to design space to the idea that every person got 2 seats. So everyone had a seat that they were sitting in at their desk, and then you had a seat someplace else, right? Whether it was in a conference room or wherever that might be. And so we always said, you know, so naturally, I think we were using our space around the idea of 40%. And then we went up to ratios closer to like what I would call a 1.3 or 1.4 in some of our environments. Sometimes they're a little bit lower. Honestly, it really depends on building. So if you're in a very small building that doesn't have a lot of community spaces, other spaces for people to be, sometimes that has to be taken into account. Again, the mobility of the team. And so there's a lot of factors. But once we got up to some of the buildings, like our large mega buildings at higher ratios like that, it's interesting, we were still only being able to see utilization around 60 to 70% on a good day. And these are teams that swear to you that no, but I'm at my desk, at my seat 100% of the time, right? So it's always very interesting what the data can help yield in some of those discussions. But I know my team, we're extremely mobile, and we always were working at like more than a 2-time ratio, and in terms of just 2 open work points. But I have to mention, like, again, yes, there's that for every 100 people, maybe there's 80 work points, like meaning actual desk, but there's 80 other spaces to choose from. So you still have tons of option and variety and choice. It's just not necessarily all at a main desk, which isn't generally my work preference, and other people have work preferences to work in other types of environments as well.
And then someone asks, how have the employees responded to the acoustics of the more open office?
So that's, everyone's afraid of noise. Everyone's afraid of noise and germs, right? Like, so when you talk about agile environments, these are things that come up a lot. And so honestly, we would do boot camps where we'd take people through it. And then the best thing we could ever do is, once we had a space, is just bring people to the middle of it and say, what do you hear, right? We actually tried white noise, tried employing it in a couple of our first spaces, and then we very quickly would shut it off and we'd test to see if anyone noticed, and nobody would notice. And so we very quickly realized we didn't necessarily need it, that when you actually have the right amount of people in the space, and that means not too little actually in a lot of cases, when you have the right amount of people, you create your own kind of background noise, and things kind of drown themselves out. And so I think the design of the space is so critical. So if we were to take a building with 13,000 people in it and you just took away all the cubicle walls, you would have a real noise issue, right? That's not what we're doing though, right? It's about all these different varieties of space type. And we actually have more closed door space in our environment now than we did prior. So it's about using what you do have to bring things back down to that human scale and break things up from an acoustic perspective, use appropriate choice of materials, and just really make sure that you're not creating giant spaces that have an acoustic problem. So I think most of those things can be solved from a design and architectural perspective. So in general, the answer is we'd take people in the middle of the room and they'd say, oh, it's really quiet. And so that's the other thing, when people see people, they adjust their behavior. Where before there was this misconception behind a high cubicle wall that you couldn't hear me. Well, you could hear me. I just couldn't see you rolling your eyes at me when I was being too loud. So now we can self-regulate. So we do find that surprisingly that is not a long-term concern in the environment. And we do build quiet spaces into our environment too, that are a buffer for visual and acoustic noise, that people have the ability to not be interrupted, that they can flow to. So it's really about having choice and variety and different elements in the space.
Here's a good one. Are there any modifications to the original design and master plan being considered to inspire people to return to the campus, given the work from home flexibility that is now an option post-pandemic?
Yeah, I think we continue to just ask ourselves, like, how do you continue to make things better? How do you continue to make spaces that people absolutely want to be? Ideas around, does the mix need to change around how much collaborative space versus how much heads down space, those types of things. But more than anything, I think just generally in terms of the iteration of design and workspace, I think we're about 1,200 lessons learned from that first photo I showed you with the divide. So we're a little bit obsessed. My team would tell you that we're slightly obsessed with getting it right and understanding that there is never going to be a right. The business is going to continue to evolve. The world's going to continue to evolve, and all of those things, that the space has to be adaptable as we go along to it. So yes, obviously we want to make sure we have spaces that people want to be. So we continue to think about those things, but the design continues to evolve as well.
So there's one question about measuring increased productivity, but also I think just happiness. And I was wondering, Candace, if you could maybe talk a little bit about your pre and post renovate transformation feedback from your groups.
Absolutely. So I was kind of moving through that quickly because I was worried about time and wanted to make sure we got to Q&A. But yes, so we do measure, we do workplace of choice surveys in General Motors, full scale ones every 2 years. And so we have had the opportunity to look at identical groups before they went into an agile environment and after. And there's a lot of really cool things that have yielded that I don't know if I was totally sure how that would yield out. And so we've had really great ideas around the idea. I think you're something like 7% more likely to, or less likely to become disengaged in your environment. You have higher perceptions around wellness and that people care about your health and safety. You're far less likely to consider leaving the company. It's really quite impressive when we measure literally exactly the same group, all things equal. The only thing that really changes is the environment, and then hopefully that environment is that catalyst for changing culture. But look at all things equal, and then use this space as a new catalyst. Very different and significant results in terms of people's perceptions about their happiness in those environments.
Can I just add one last comment, chime in there for Lisa? Lisa, I think every organization probably measures productivity in a different way. I think the most important, and that's obviously important to figure out in the kind of math that we're talking about here. But and I think it's important. I think for me, the most important point is like get the right voices to the table. Get to the table those voices who can help figure out what does productivity mean to us, what does health and well-being mean to us, get HR, get finance, get the right voices at the table to have this discussion, to expand the discussion beyond what is the cost per square foot that we're going to see for in this space.
And I think we're out of time. So everyone else, we appreciate all your interest.
Yes, and George,
yes,
I think that is a really good topic, we will look into perhaps addressing that as part of our programming in October. So cool. Thank you for that. And thank you, George, Nancy, and Candace for a really interesting look at the great work that GM and SmithGroup are doing. And thank you, everybody, for attending this session. A recording will be available on our NeoCon website in the next couple of days. And we have 4 additional programs on designing well, 1 more this afternoon and 3 tomorrow. So we hope everyone will consider joining us for those programs as well. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. It was fun.